In this tutorial, we will have a look how we can make this dust effect as you can notice. And before I jump into the coding part, I want to thank Guilherme, Damasceno and Sealey for donating me on Patreon. And if you guys want to support me, you can do so on Patreon as well as on YouTube. And by taking membership, you can unlock many benefits. So let's dive into this topic. For that, what we will do, we will move over to our project tab, then assets folder, and I will head over to my sprites folder and then dust folder. I'm going to double click on it. So as you can see, we have all of these sprites, and of course I will have a link in the description of these sprites dust effect. You can go and check that out. So we will select all of them by holding down shift, then go over to inspector and make this pixel per unit a less number. So we're gonna go with 20 in order to make this sprite larger. And filter mode, we're gonna choose point of filter to get rid of blurry thing. And after doing that, make sure you click on this apply button in the bottom right. And now what we will do, if we select the first one, then go over to inspector, then click on this open sprite editor. What we want to change the pivot point. But before we do, as you can notice that if I click on this arrow, we have only one sprite. So one sprite. So what we want to do, we will select all of this sprite by holding down shift, then go over to inspector, sprite mode to choose single. Why? Because we have one sprite only, so that's why we're going to choose sprite mode to single. And after doing that, make sure you just click on this apply button in the bottom, else it's gonna be weird. So that is the thing. So make sure you select a single, because we can see the individual sprite. So that's why we need to choose this sprite mode to single. And after doing that, we want to change the pivot point. So if I select the first one, then go over to inspector, click on open sprite editor and click on it. So as soon as we click on it, we can see sprite, and it will be something like center like this. So what we will do, we will select a pivot point and we're going to click on it, and we're going to select our bottom center. And after doing that, make sure you go to sprite editor tab. In the top right, you can see apply. So just click on this apply button, and we're going to do the same thing with all of these sprites. So we will select one by one. So I already have done it. As you can see, I have chosen bottom center pivot point, and then click on this apply button in the sprite editor tab. In the top right, you can see I already have done it, so I'm not gonna do it again. So I'm gonna select my game view once again, and let's select the first sprite, and let's click on this arrow, or you can simply select it, drag it over to the scene view or into this hierarchy. So I'm gonna drag it into the my scene view, and let's call this game object to something like dust effect. So I'm going to call it dust effect, and I'm going to select my dust effect game object in the hierarchy, and let's drag it over to top of our hierarchy so we can see all the time. And now we can see the pivot point is bottom center of this sprite, and we can notice that. And we're gonna make the animation, but before you make the animation, make sure you just go over to project tab, then assets, right click on it, create folder, and name that folder to something like animation, because we just want to keep our project clean. So that's why we just want to place all of our animation into that folder. I already created, as you can notice right over here, and we are ready to create the animation. So for that, let's head over to project tab, assets, and then sprites folder one more time, then dust folder, and we will select all of them by holding down shift, all of this individual sprite, and drag it top of this dust effect game object in the hierarchy. So it's gonna make the animation right away. So assets we can see in the top, so we will go to assets, and you're gonna see in the left bottom you will see. So make sure you just go to assets, and in assets we can notice we have the animation folder. So we're gonna open that up by double clicking on it, and we have to name the animation. So this will be the dust effect animation. So I'm gonna call it something like dust effect, something like that, dust effect. And let's click on that save button or hit enter. And if we now select our dust effect, then go over to animation tab and then click on this play button, we can see the animation is playing over again and again. And I don't want this animation clip to be loop. I only want to show this once our player game object jumps gonna from this ground game object. So we don't want this animation clip to be loop, so we will head over to our project tab, assets, and then animation folder. So basically we need to move over to that folder in which folder we created the animation clip. So we created inside this animation folder, as you can see, and we can see the clip which is does effect animation clip right over here. So we will select the clip, then go over to inspector, and we're gonna uncheck this loop time because we don't want to loop that animation clip over again and again. And now we're gonna select our does effect game object in the hierarchy, and we will make it a prefab. So we will we will have the copy, and we can spawn it wherever we need. So we will select our does effect. So we will select our does effect in the hierarchy, and let's drag it over to this assets folder in order to turn it into a prefab. But before you turn it into a prefab, make sure you make a prefab folder and then drag it there. So I'm gonna drag it inside my animation folder or inside my assets folder simply. If you just want to if you want to keep your project clean, then create a prefab folder and then drag it there. And now we don't need this dash effect for now in the scene view or in this hierarchy, or you can simply say in the game view. We don't need it, so we're going to select that and let's delete it. And we want to spawn it when our player game object jumps. So if I select my player game object, so whenever this player game object jumps, then we're gonna spawn it. And we have a function called on collision exit 2D. Basically that function get called when we leave a collider. And make sure you assign your ground as a ground tag. Basically select your ground. So in my case I'm gonna select my ground tile, then go over to inspector. So it will be untagged right over here. So make sure you click on this add tag in the bottom and then click on this plus icon, name the tag whatever you want. So in my case ground, and then click on this save. I already created, so I'm not gonna do it again. And make sure you select your ground tile or ground game object in the hierarchy one more time, then go over to inspector, then tag it whatever you recently created. So I already assigned it as a ground tag, as you can notice. Now we assign it this ground as a ground tag, so this player game object know this is our ground. So whenever we're gonna leave our ground, then we're gonna spawn it. So for that we will create a script. So for it, just move over to your project tab, then assets folder, then script folder, then right click there, then create mono behavior script. And you can name that script to something like does effect, player does effect, something like that. And then attach it. I already created a script called does effect. So if I move over to my assets folder, sorry, I have it inside this sprites folder, I guess. If you not able to find, so you can search over here. So which is player does effect, and I can see this script is right over here. So make sure you select your player game object in the hierarchy and select that script and drag it over to this add component section in the inspector. I'm not gonna do it since I already attached, as you can notice. So we will simply open that up by double clicking on it. And now what we will do, we will remove this start and update function we don't need. Instead we're going to use a function called on collision exit 2D function. Basically that function get called when we leave a collider. So let's suppose this player game object jumps, so it's going to leave this ground collider or this ground. So that function just gonna trigger. So we need to type this on collision exit 2D function. So this function get called when we leave our collider. So if this player game object just gonna jump, so it's gonna leave the ground tile or it's gonna leave our ground collider. So that's why this function over here gonna get called. And we can extract information about what we lived with. So by going over to this collision parameter, so we can just extract the name of the game object we just leave it the collider, the name of it. We can access anything like that, and we do know that we assign it that ground as a ground tag. So what we will do over here, we're gonna check. So we will check, let's make if condition, let's make first bracket and some curly brackets. So what we want to check over here, we basically want to check if we leave our ground collider, If that is the case, then we need to spawn it. For now, we're gonna print out a message. So we're gonna type this collision dot game object, and collision dot game object basically means the game object we just lived with the the collider. So in our case, that's gonna be this ground, because we're gonna leave this ground collider. So over here we're doing, so collision dot game object over here basically gonna be that ground. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna access the tag of it. So we will type those tag, and we will check if it's equals to ground, and we do know that. And make sure you do it inside this quotation. So we're checking, firstly this function get called when we leave collider, and we're checking if we leaving our ground collider. So firstly we just going to our game object, which is ground game object, and then accessing the tag of it, and we checking if the tag is equals to ground. And we do know that we assigned this ground as a ground tag, and we checking it over here. Basically means we just leaving our ground collider. So what we need to do now, we need to spawn that dust effect. For now we're gonna print out a message if it's working fine or not. So let's print out. So we're gonna type this debug.log, and let's say something like spawn or living ground collider. Let's say something like living ground collider, living ground collider. And let's close that up with semicolon, and we're gonna press down Ctrl S to save our script, and let's move over to Unity. So as soon as we're gonna leave our ground, so as soon as this player game object just gonna jump, then it's gonna leave our ground collider, and we're checking if the tag of that game object has a call ground, and we do know that we assigned it this ground as a ground tag. Then what we're doing, we're simply printing out the message in the console says this leaving ground collider. So this message just gonna pop up as soon as we're gonna leave our ground collider, or they're gonna jump from this collider. So that message just gonna pop up. So I'm gonna select my console tab, and let's click on this clear, and let's click on this play button in the top in order to play our game. And as soon as we're gonna jump from this ground collider, that message just gonna pop up, because we're checking the tag of it before we just leaving it. And if the tag is ground, then we just doing that thing. So now if I press down a space key on my keyboard, as you can see, as soon as we leaving collider, basically if the player is over here, and we do know if the player is in the air, it's basically means it's not colliding with this ground, it's basically leaving the ground. So that's why the message we can see in our console tab just getting pop-up says leaving ground collider. Instead of printing out message, we want to show up that effect, which is our dust effect. So we will get out of play mode. So we need a reference of that dust effect prefab game object. So if I head over to my project tab and then assets folder, as you can see we have the dust effect right over here. So we need a reference of this game object, then we can spawn it. And we also need a point from where we want to spawn it. We want to spawn it of this player game object, this game object from feet of this player game object. So we're going to create a point somewhere in the bottom, and we're going to move it into feet of this player game object, because we want to spawn it from there. So we'll select our player game object in the hierarchy. Let's right click on it, and let's create an empty child game object, and I'm gonna name this game object to something like dust effect spawn point. So let's call it dust effect spawn point, and go over to inspector. Then you can just click over here, and you can choose any gizmos you like, and I'm gonna move it in the bottom somewhere over here. So from this point I want to spawn. So we need a reference of this point as well as this dust effect game object, and after that we can spawn it. So let's open up our player dust effect script by double clicking on it, and let's go to top of our class, and let's grab those reference. So the first thing we need our game object. So let's make a public, and that dust effect game object itself a whole game object. So that's why we need to type this game object type, and we can call this one dust effect prefab. So let's call it dust effect prefab, and let's close that up with semicolon. And we also need a reference of that point. So we're gonna make another public transform is responsible for position we do know, or point, and we can call this one something like spawn point, or we can simply call it dust spawn point. Let's call it dust, sorry, I'm gonna call this one dust spawn point. does spawn point. And now we're gonna press down Ctrl S to save our script, and let's head over to Unity. So we need to assign those variables. So underneath our player does effects script, those fields just gonna pop up. So we need to assign one by one. So the first thing just gonna pop up is our does effect prefab. So what we need to do there, we basically need to drag our does effect game object. So we will have the reference of that game object, then we can spawn it, and also we need to assign our position. So now as soon as our script just gets compiled, we can see does effect prefab and it says none. So what we will do, we will move over to our project tab assets, and we will select our does effect game object, and let's drag it there, and we have does spawn point and it says none transform. So we're gonna select our does effect spawn point, and let's drag it over to there. Now we can see we have the does effect prefab game object as well as the point from where we want to spawn it. So now we're gonna open that up, and instead of printing out message, we're gonna spawn that. And we do know that to spawn it, we need to use this instantiate function, and this instantiate function in brackets as a first argument, it's gonna take the game object that we want to spawn. So we're gonna pass our does effect prefab, and we do know that as a does effect prefab, we just drag it that does effect game object as you seen. And the second thing, it's gonna take the point, so we will pass our does effect point, and we're gonna access the position, so we will type this dot position. And the third thing, it's gonna take the rotation, so we don't want to rotate like that, so we're gonna put something like quaternion dot identity. It's basically means no rotation. And now we're gonna close that up with semicolon, and if we press down Ctrl S and then go over to inspector, and now as soon as we're gonna leave our ground, you will see that does effect game object just gonna spawn from this does effect point, because as a point we just pass this and we just drag our does effect that we want to spawn it, that instantiate function just taking that, and now it should be fine. Instead of printing out message by now, that does effect basically that does just gonna spawn. So let's click on this play button in the top in order to play our game, and let's take a look on this. So just wait a moment, and once it's done we can check that out. So now if we jump from this ground game object, so we can see indeed the does effect is spawning, but the problem is that we need to play around with our basically what we basically have to do. We need to drag our does effect point a little bit down, or we can simply offset it. So I'm gonna get out of play mode, so let's add a offset like that. So to do that, we're gonna open up our script, and over here as you can see does effect point dot position, and top of this we're gonna add a offset in the y-axis, so it's gonna spawn from perfect position. So what we will do, we will go to top of our class, and let's create another vector 3. Why we gonna create a vector 3? Because this does effect does spawn point have position like x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis. So that's why we're gonna create a vector 3, and top of that we're gonna add top of this our does point, we're gonna add that offset. So let's create so we're gonna create public vector 3, which gonna have x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis, and we can call this one something like offset, and let's close that up with semicolon, and top of this our does point dot position, we will add the offset, so we can spawn that spawn it from correct position. So we're gonna add our offset, so use this plus icon. So top of our position, spawn point position, as you can see, we're gonna add the offset. So let's do offset, and this offset just gonna have x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis. And now we're gonna press down Ctrl S to save our script, and now let's move over to Unity. So underneath our player does effect script, we will able to notice a offset variable just gonna pop up, and it's gonna have x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis. So we want to spawn it from middle center of this player game object, sorry, middle center, not bottom center. So we only gonna check with this y, basically we're gonna add some minus value, so the does effect just gonna spawn perfectly. So basically that is the thing. I hope you get the idea. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna put in the y some minus value. So let's put minus 2.5 something like that, or 2.4, and if we just go ahead and then click on this play button, and we don't want to change around in the X or Z. So top of our spawn point, we just adding this offset, as you can see, which have X axis, Y axis, and the Z axis. So we don't want to change around in the X. So now if I jump, we can see, but it's not spawning. So what we can do, we can increase our value. So let's put something like minus 0.8. And if in the Y, we're not gonna change around in the X and Z, because we just want to spawn it from middle. So that's why we only changing around in the Y, and we doing minus, so it's gonna be negative direction. So top of this does effect spawn point, from we just adding the offset, as you can notice in our script right over here. So now let's check that out. So if I just press down, we can see now that it's spawning from a perfect position. So we need to little bit up. So what we can do, we can just put minus 0.7, and if we now check that out, so minus 0.7, it seems perfect number, or we can simply do minus 0.68, something like that. And remember this value. And as you can notice that if we move over to hierarchy, we have the dust clone. So we need to also need to destroy this after some period of time. Basically, once the animation compilation animation is done perfectly, then after that period of time, we need to destroy this dust effect. So dust effect, we do know that it has the animation. So after completing the animation, we need to destroy the dust effect as well. So let's get out of play mode, and make sure you just remember the number. If you just get out of play mode and if you just change anything around in the play mode, it's not gonna change at all. So now if I select my player game object, then go over to my player touch effect, instead of minus 0.24, I'm gonna put minus 6.8, as you saw earlier. So this is perfect number. And now what we have to do, we need to destroy that dust effect after some period of time. But before we destroy, we need to check the animation. So we will head over to our project tab, assets, and then prefabs folder. Prefabs folder, sorry, not prefabs. Basically, we're gonna open up that dust effect prefab by double clicking on it, as you can see. And if we select this, then go over to animation and then play this. So as you can see, after something like 0.5, it's just completing the whole animation clip, something like this. So 0.15 just gonna be perfect, I guess. Okay, so 0.2. So after this much of time, it's just completing the whole animation clip. So after this much of time, we need to destroy this dash effect. And to go back in hierarchy, you can see the back arrow. So just click there in order to go back. And now we're gonna open up our player dash effect one more time. And now what we have to do, we need to destroy after that amount of time. So we spawning this dash effect at this point with offset. We just added the offset in order to just spawn it a little bit in the down direction from feet of our player game object, you can simply say, with no rotation. And after spawning that does effect, we're gonna store it into a container, or you can simply say in a variable or in a parameter, and that will be game object type. Why? Because this does affect itself a whole game object. So that's why the container type or the parameter type should be game object, and we have to name the container or the parameter. So I'm gonna call it something like temp does effect, task effect, or temporary task effect, and then set equal to this. So firstly, we spawning this task effect at this position with our offset and with no rotation. After spawning that, we storing that task effect prefab that we store it that we spawn it into this container, which is does temp does effect. So we also need to destroy this container or where we store it. So we're going to destroy that. To destroy, we need to use this destroy function, and we do know that this function as a first argument, it's going to take the game object we want to destroy. So we're going to destroy this temp does effect where we stored our does effect. And the second thing, comma, we need to specify the time. So after something like 0.3 0.2 or like that, after that amount of time it's just completing the whole animation clip. So that's why as a second argument I'm gonna put the time which is 0.2f after completing the whole animation clip. And now we're gonna close that up with semicolon. So firstly we're spawning at this position with no rotation, and after spawning we're storing into this temp dust effect. So where we're storing, we just destroying that as well after this amount of time, as you can notice. And now we're gonna press down Ctrl S to save our script, and let's head over to Unity. So after this much of time you will see that dust effect clone that we spawned, it's gonna destroy itself after that amount of time. And we just added the offset to our dust point. Or what you can simply do, you can just drag your dust point in the bottom as well. If you don't want to add the offset, then you can just take your dust effects point, basically this point, and you can just drag it somewhere over here, so it's gonna be perfect. I hope you got the idea by now. So now if we go ahead and then click on this play button in the top in order to play our game, you will see as soon as we're gonna jump, that does effect just gonna spawn from our feet of this player game object, and it's gonna destroy after itself after 0.2 second. So now if I jump, as you can see, after this amount of time we can notice that it's just destroying itself and it seems fine. And I'm gonna get out of play mode, and let's suppose you don't want to add the offset, so you can just remove this right over here. And what you can simply do, you can select your dust effect spawn point underneath your player game object, and you can drag it somewhere over here. So the point so it's gonna spawn somewhere over here, so it's gonna be perfect. But for better performance, make sure you just add the offset and it's gonna be fine. So I hope you get the idea that how you can spawn the dust effect. And now I will see you in the next tutorial. So bye for now. I'm gonna see you in the next tutorial.